Theatrerisation. That's been the buzzword in the Indian military ever since PM Modi's announcement in 2019. Ever since then, there's been a lot of debate and chatter over this concept and idea of theatreization and why the Indian military was going towards that. But what is this concept of theatreization? Why do we even need it in the first place? Do we need it in the first place?
Awesome show.
Yeah.
Dave, I have to admit, I'm no big fan of the Chinese or Xi Jinping or Mao, but I have to say that parade was the most impressive military parade I have ever seen. Possibly, if you look at it, historical parallels, it would be the Great Parade that the Soviet Union put up on the Red Square after winning the Second World War. Theaters are, of course, the theater of war, and it has to do with warfare, war fighting. It's not about it's not about parades, certainly. It's not about training or planning or acquisitions. This is about the sharp end of the sword. That is the war fighting, which is what militaries essentially are for. They are for warfare, they're for war fighting, they're for deterring conflict, they're for protecting borders. That you need to have joint war fighting structures that would integrate all the assets of various organizations, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and basically fight together, plan and fight together. So it's actually at the combat edge of conflict that theaters they become so important. You have one naval command, you have 4 army commands, and you have 3 Air Force commands, all fighting this different, the same front. So you would imagine the amount of bureaucracy that's going to go on, that you will have multiple battles being fought all across the line of control and the international border.
And there was this feeling that he would be able to push it through. He would be able to get people on board, but to be able to get people on board, you'll have to push certain things through.
Yes.
Hello and welcome to Another Defense. Theatreization. That's been the buzzword in the Indian military ever since PM Modi's announcement in 2019 that the Indian government would be setting up the post of the Chief of Defence Staff. That post went to General Bipin Rawat, who was the first one to be in office in that post. And ever since then, there's been a lot of debate and chatter over this concept and idea of theatreization and why the Indian military was going towards that. There was a lot of movement on that when General Bipin Rawat was in office, but he unfortunately died around 2 years after he took charge of that office. And ever since then, that project has been in sort of limbo, essentially. Last week, debate on this topic was broached again by the Air Force Chief, Air Chief Marshal A.P. Singh, when he was addressing a seminar at the Samvad, a 2-day military conference that was held recently in India. Where in a rare instance of an Air Force officer in public coming out against this idea, he basically said that, that is not something that was for us. It's not something that we should import from the West or from China, but, we should have our own processes and stuff like that. The basic idea of his talk was that the Air Force was not happy with the idea of theatreization. That's not something new, by the way. It's been known widely thanks to a lot of reporting, but this was, I think, a rare instance where the Air Force came out in public about this. But what is this concept of theatreization? Why do we even need it in the first place? Do we need it in the first place? To break this down, I have with me Sandeep Unnithan. Hey, Sandeep.
Good to be back, Dave.
Good to have you. Actually, on this topic, I don't know who better than you, because back in 2019 December, I remember the date correctly, 30th December. People in military circles were just waiting to know who the CDS would be, because this back then, the retirement of General Bipin Rawat, who was then the army chief, was fast approaching. And at 10 p.m. that night, you put out a tweet with a can of beer that said Bira. And a day later, it was Bipin Rawat.
That's correct.
Who took charge as the CDS.
It's good you remember that. I had forgotten that.
No, I remember because, we all of us were closely following that because the announcement had been made a few months earlier.
Right.
And there was a lot of speculation of who would be the first CDS. And the worry was that if he retired, then perhaps somebody else would take charge. Then who? There was a lot of speculation, basically. So I was watching that with very hawk's eye, and then that tweet came of yours, and it turned out to be true. So yeah. Sandeep, before we get to the Air Chief's comments,
Yeah.
before we get to the debate and the interesting parallel that you drew right before we began recording this, that we are still talking about this topic a day after China held its 80th Victory Day parade, where it where it's displayed some of the most high tech weaponry. Though we don't know if it's barrel tested, but still the comparison is
It
sad.
was an awesome show,
Yeah.
Dave. I have to admit. I mean, I'm no big fan of the Chinese or Xi Jinping or Mao, but I have to say that that parade was the most impressive military parade I have ever seen. Possibly, I mean, if you look at it, historical parallels, it would be the Great Parade that the Soviet Union put up on the Red Square after winning the Second World War. That would be the most spectacular parade of all time, where you have Generals Zhukov and Konstantin Rokossovsky on horseback inspecting the parade. They were cavalry officers, of course. The greatness of that parade, but this parade, Xi Jinping's parade, in terms of sheer optics, I mean, this boggles the mind. The fact that you're able to put on a parade of this size, this scale, this scope, there was so many messages rolled in that, And yes, we are talking about theaters. 6 years after the Chief of Defense Staff was announced, and of course, he set out with his task for the first 2 years, we are still yet to see phase 2 of those reforms that were rolled out in 2019.
Yeah. But for our listeners and viewers to be better able to understand this topic, I think it's best if we first explains the concept of theaters, because it's a word that comes naturally to people who cover this domain, people like you, people like me who read up a lot about this domain, the world of military, in the world of national security and stuff like that. What at the very basic level is a theater? The concept of theaterization, why do you even need it? And I think perhaps it goes back to World War II, when you had countries fighting in far off places, far away from where you actually are. And I think people don't sort of understand the sheer vastness of World War II, where you basically had, the Russia had several different armies. It wasn't one single army. There are several different armies. That's the amount of fighting that took
Russia
place.
is a big country. I mean, it's across 11 time zones.
Yeah. So, for me, World War II, I mean, if you were to look at it in cinematic terms, it's Saving Private Ryan, the first visuals, the Normandy landings.
Yes.
You had a ton of people landing on the beaches on naval warships with air support.
Yeah.
That's a theater, I'm guessing. So, but break it down for us, Sandeep. What is theaterization and why do we talk about it?
Right. Good points, Dave. And the fact is that, theaters are, of course, the theater of war. And it has to do with warfare, war fighting. It's not about, it's not about parades, certainly. It's not about training or planning or acquisitions. This is about the sharp end of the sword. That is the war fighting, which is what militaries essentially are for. They are for warfare, they're for war fighting, they're for deterring conflict, they're for protecting borders. All of that comes down to theaters, and that is where theaters are so important. And as you mentioned, they became very important during the Second World War, where you had multiple theaters simultaneously playing out across the world, which is why it was called the Second World War. You had the Axis powers, you had Italy, Germany, Japan, versus the Allies, who were Japan, Great Britain, the United States, the USSR, several other countries, France. And this was a war that was fought across multiple theaters simultaneously. You had warfare raging in North Africa, then that moved to Europe, and then of course it was raging in Asia as well with the Empire of Japan. So it was a simultaneous conflict spanning the globe, 6 years. And that is where really the concept of modern theaters emerged. What happened after the Second World War is that militaries continued in that fashion of standalone entities. You had primarily the three armed forces. You had the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. In this case of in the Army, it was the Army, and you had the Army Air Forces as well, like you had in the United States. Japan had only the Army. Air Forces, of course, more recent in origin. That's the reason they were part of the Army in the 20th century. But then the realization grew that you need to have joint warfighting structures that would integrate all the assets of various organizations, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and basically fight together, plan and fight together. So it's actually at the combat edge of conflict that theaters they become so important. And countries that did not do this discovered this to their peril, like the Japanese, for instance. You had a very powerful Imperial Japanese army, you had a very powerful Imperial Japanese navy, but they fought two different conflicts in the same war. So the army had its own strategy, the navy had its own strategy. And because they didn't combine forces, they didn't think together, they didn't plan together, they didn't train together, and they didn't fight together, you saw their combat power being frittered away. And the classic case is the Battle of Midway. They broke up their forces. The Navy was doing its own thing. The Army was doing its own thing. The Navy said, I will fight the ultimate battle at sea. I will destroy the US Navy. The Army said, I will do the ultimate land invasion and all that. Whether they should, they could have actually combined their forces. I'm not saying that would have won the war for Japan. It would certainly have won that battle for them. It would have, because they had the advantage when the battle began, the Battle of Midway. And when the battle ended, it was the most catastrophic naval defeat possibly since the Battle of Tsushima, where the entire Japanese carrier battle group was destroyed. 4 carriers were sunk in a span of a few hours, right? So from there, a lot of the thinking emerged that, look, we need to put our forces together, we need to combine our forces so that we present a joint front towards the enemy. And a particular theater of combat would have the army, it would have the navy, it would have the air force, all fighting as one. And now we come to the Indian story, which is that we've always fought separately from 1947 onwards. But during Kargil, that was the turning point, where they discovered that the 3 forces were not on the same page. The army detected the intrusions. It started tackling the intruders on the heights of Kargil, and it was the Air Force that entered the conflict much later. A few weeks after the army had begun fighting. That went up to the politicians, and then they had to finally ask the Air Force to enter the conflict. The Navy also entered much later. So it was like a slow-moving process of one force coming in, then a second force, and then a third force. And then towards the end, you have something of a united front. So the thinking at that time was that, could we not have fought this together? You have an integrated theater over there. The theater commander then becomes responsible for all the land and air forces in his area of responsibility, in his theater of responsibility, and there the Navy would also be there along that Arabian Sea front. Now the thing is, in India, over the years, we have 13 different commands. The Air Force has 5 commands, the Army has 5 commands, the Navy has 3 commands. And it's so funny that for instance, if you were to prosecute a war against Pakistan on the Western Front, how many commands are you going to talk about? You have 1 naval command, you have 4 army commands, and you have 3 Air Force commands, all fighting this different, the same front. So you would imagine the amount of bureaucracy that's going to go on, that you will have multiple battles being fought all across the line of control and the international border. So here the solution that emerged after several years of debates and discussions after post-2019 was that we need to have just 3 or maybe 4 theaters. And the theaters will be headed by a theater commander. He could be from the Army, the Navy, or from the Air Force, one of the 3 services. And you would have just from 13 single service commands strung all across the country, you would come down to just 3 commands, 3 or maybe 4 commands. 1 command facing China, that's the Northern Command. 1 command facing Pakistan, that's the Western Command, and 1 command facing the ocean, that is your Ocean Command, the Maritime Command, and that would possibly be headed by the Navy. And the theater commander would have under him tri-service representative. You would have an Air Force component commander, you would have an Army component commander, you would have Navy component commander. So in that sense, the debate about what will a naval commander know about air operations, or what will he know about army operations?
There's someone to advise.
Yeah, you have a component commander there, right? Exactly like how it functions in the Andaman and Nicobar command, where you have it's a very small command. I mean, firstly, it is not it's compared to the kind of commands that we are envisaging, the theater command. It's a tiny command, but it's a very important first step, because you see there you have the SINCAN, who heads the command, and under him he has three
Yes.
component commanders from the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. So you have the naval component commander who has the frigates, the patrol craft, the naval assets under him. You have the Air Force component commander who has fighters when they come there. He has the helicopters, fixed wing aircraft, drones, and then you have the Army component commander. So this was actually meant to be the laboratory, the test bed for implementing the theater commands. And the Navy was very far-sighted in that sense, about 25 years back, when this whole thinking, this thought process began after the Kargil Review Committee. Navy said, here, we give you one of our commands. Let's start the process over here. So in fact, the Navy has been strangely at the forefront of theaterization. All the arguments, all the staff work for theater commands under First General Rawat and then his successor, General Anil Chauhan, have been done by the Navy. A lot of the planning has been done by the Navy. So that's how we see it in the Indian context. But this whole process was to have happened 2 years back. I was there in the college, Army War College, Dev, when the Air Force chief said that, and my heart sank when he said it. I said, oh my God, we are back to square one.
Back to square one, yeah.
It's like, I thought this debate was settled.
Yeah.
But it possibly was until Op Sindoor. But I think what has happened after Operation Sindoor is that the Air Force now believes that this is their moment. That you, for the first time, have a political leadership that understands coercive, offensive air power. And they said, we cannot lose this momentum. If we lose this momentum, we might get subsumed into these theater commands.
Yeah.
And the Air Force will not be what we are capable of, which is this fantastic aerospace power that can strike across the globe, across India's, frontiers, areas of influence and all that. So that is where this entire debate is coming from. And of course, Air Chief Marshal A.P. Singh, I must tell you, Dev, is a man who speaks his mind. And we've seen that.
We've seen that. We've seen that.
All of this year, 2025, starting from January, there's never a dull moment when the Air Chief is around. He always speaks his mind. And it's a good thing. We do need service chiefs to speak up their mind, give good professional advice to the government. And I'm sure he has his reasons for what he's spoken out, what he's very clearly articulated. But it is, of course, for the government to take a call on this.
Of course.
The ball is in
Yeah.
the Prime Minister's court.
Yeah. But I do want to understand what at the very core is the Air Force's issue with this idea and the concept. And to your point, yes, the Air Chief is a person who speaks his mind, but it's not as though these comments have not been made before internally, because that's where reporters like you have drawn your reporting from to be able to tell us that the Air Force is not really on board, and that's something that we've heard ever since this topic was broached in the first aspect. Though what was seen was that General Bipin Rawat was aggressive in that regard, and there was this feeling that he would be able to push it through. He would be able to get people on board, but to be able to get people on board, you'll have to push certain things through.
Yes.
But I'm guessing it didn't help when he, in a very famous interview to Gaurav Sawant of India Today, said that the Air Force is just a support arm of the Indian military. So comments like that, I'm guessing, is what pissed the Air Force off a bit. And I think that's where the core objection comes from. But apart from that, the larger core objection of the Air Force.
Well, I mean, the Chief of Defence Staff, the late General Rawat, has made these comments. I mean, I've been privy. In fact, one of the first discussions with him after he'd become CDS was he said, oh, well, the Air Force is a support arm and they're all meant to support the army. And see, I see that where he comes from, because, and this is the tragedy, that the Air Force has always considered itself outside the pale of the other armed forces. And we've all been fighting, like I said, like the Japanese, we've been fighting. The Navy is fighting its own war. The Army has been fighting its own war. The Air Force fights its own war. But the integrated war fighting is what we need to look at now. And I think General Rawat's comments might have, triggered off some concern, some anxiety amongst the Air Force brass, where the Air Force is paranoid about being subsumed by the Indian Army. They said, look, we don't want to do the Army's tactical war fighting. We don't want to be destroying one bunker or one small target or destroying a bridge. We have to do the larger strategic planning. We have to do the strategic war fighting, which is to hit the enemy in his reserves, prevent him from mobilizing. And we saw that in Operation Sindoor. In less than 30 minutes, you paralyzed the Pakistan Air Force. You destroyed his air defense network, his air defense cover. And that's the reason that they went to the United States and said, listen, make these guys stop. Because that those blows that were struck were very, very swift. They were very resolute, and their impact was devastating. So that is how the Air Force and the air power and all that function. But having said that, the Air Force has some very key arguments against air power. And if you read what the air chiefs have been saying, what they've been writing, senior Air Force brass have been talking about, they say that, look, we anyway just have less than 30 squadrons, 30 fighter squadrons. If you put us in penny packets among all the different theater commands, you divide us among all these theater commands, we're going to have very little to fight with. And their concept is air power is indivisible. You cannot, it's one country, it's one Air Force, it's one aerospace. So, that's the kind of approach that they've been looking at. But, critics of that will argue, Dave, that why have 5 different commands then? Why have 5 different Air Force commands?
True.
So now here's why I worry now is that the compromise formula they might work out is a single aerospace command.
Yes.
Let the Army have one command, let the Navy have one command, and the Air Force have one command. So you divide
basically what you have right now.
So you're coming down to that. And the only reform would really be that it will be theater commanders in charge of each of these theaters. The Army will look at the Northern Command and possibly the Western Command. The Air Force could look at the Aerospace Command. The Navy, of course, has the Maritime Theater Command. But, this defeats the purpose of an integrated approach. Where you're looking at the theater commander who fights. He needs to have all the resources at his command. And he doesn't have to dial someone for, whatever he needs.
Exactly.
And I think this argument also that the Air Force is making, that you're going to just divide it into penny packets and all. They're not going to another country, right? They're all within your country, and those resources will be at the level of the Chief of Defence Staff, where it will be decided here in Delhi as well. That look, this is the way we're going to fight this war, and this is how we're going to prosecute it. Even if it's a 2-front war, the first day of the thing, you obviously can't fight simultaneously. You can hold one front and move in on another front, and those plans exist for how they will fight a 2-front war. But all of this will be done in Delhi. It is not that you will have the scenario of one theater commander saying, no, I refuse to part with any of my assets, and I'm not going to give you any squadrons or something like that. It's not going to become like a tutu meme as is being widely feared. But the Air Force's point is this, and they've repeatedly articulated this, that they're opposed to theaterization. They don't want their squadrons to be integrated into these various penny packets. And I was reading one of the Air Force retired officers who wrote recently, it's like breaking a sword into 3 parts. You can't have 3 parts of a sword. You need to have 1 part. So that in essence is what the Air Force's arguments against theater commands are. But we've been through all of this, Dave. I mean, it's been 6 years now. We have debated, we have discussed. There have been committees. In fact, interestingly, one of the air chiefs' recommendations was that we need to have a committee to decide. So that's the great Indian committee trick. To make sure that something always gets pushed. The can gets kicked further down the road. But we've been through all of this. It's been 25 years. In fact, in another couple of months, it's going to be 25 years since we first heard theater commands and the Chief of Defence Staff. Way back in 2001, the group of ministers that went into the Kargil review committee, they recommended all of this, right? So every time you keep coming back to square one, you go down a certain path, you implement phase 1 of the reforms, the Chief of Defence Staff. That was it is the most significant reform of the Indian military since 1947. The Chief of Defence Staff, the Department of Military Affairs, the Chairman, Chief of Staff, he wears 3 hats basically. He's the Secretary, he's the Advisor, and he's also the Chairman, Chief of Staff's Committee. So that is the most significant military reform. Phase 2 is what we are talking about, which is theatres. And I have a sense that the Prime Minister could announce that when he has that the Triple C, the Combined Commanders Conference in Kolkata in a few weeks from now. And if he doesn't say it now, my fear is that the momentum that you've built up post-Op Sindoor, Dev, that kind of is going to get frittered away. There could be arguments against that to say that, listen, we can't reform under fire. We have an ongoing military operation that is Sindoor. Therefore, we need to hold the reforms like this, because if you go into theaters right now, then we risk distracting the Indian military. All of those arguments will be made against that. But finally, like all other countries of the world, Dave, you can argue that we can't import Western concepts, you can't import Western theaters into the Indian context. But in every single country in the world, it has always been the political executive that said, go do theaters, make them happen. They have overridden all their military's objections, because militaries hate change, like everyone else, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we're here in India today. I was here when all those furious debates took place about integrating print, digital, and television into one mediaplex, and those debates were settled. One theater, a single theater. Those debates were settled more than 13 years back when India Today shifted here to Noida and the mediaplex. And who can argue today that this should have been the way it was in the past, where every organization was on its own. You had print on its own, digital on its own, and television on its own. So, that is, of course, a very, very small aspect of this. Theaters are doing much, much bigger stuff. They're defending national borders. They're protecting India and its people. But the point is that people hate change. And the armed forces are no different from this. It's at the end of the day, it's all about turf. It's about forces. It's about protecting the unique character. It's about protecting billets. Let's not forget that when theaters come, a whole lot of very senior appointments are going to collapse and disappear. And who would want to be known as a particular service chief in whose tenure this happened? This was the particular chief who allowed this to happen, and therefore this particular service lost a lot of billets. It lost appointments and all of that. So I think there's a lot playing on in the mind of the service chiefs. But like I said, Dave, it is going to be a political call. It was Ronald Reagan who flagged off the Goldwater-Nichols reforms. When the reports came in, the armed forces refused to get it implemented. They said, we can't allow this to happen. A whole lot of service chiefs were sacked. And finally, the theaters happened. And the United States, of course, is where it is today because of that. This is not to say that we should copycat what the US did, because what the US does with theaters is very, very different from what we envisage. We're looking at theaters on our own soil, right? Looking at our own interests, our own borders, facing our immediate geographical neighbors. We're not planning to fight in South America or in Antarctica or capture Greenland or something like that, right? We are geographically contiguous. So within our borders, we are trying to get our armed forces give the best bang for the buck for India's defense and security.
Yeah. I mean, I quite get the idea, because I think, and this is something that would resonate with any of our listener or viewer, is that within a company, when you have all the teams reporting to that single boss, they kind of come together.
Right.
And when you have to work with teams who are reporting to a different boss, even though your end goal is the same, even your overall company's KR is the same, there will be friction.
Yes.
There will be debates, and they'll be like, at the end of the day, boss, I don't report to you or your boss. Right. I'll go to my boss and ask him.
Yeah. But we pull in resources.
Yes, we do that. Yeah, exactly.
So that's what this concept also is. That, and I think the downstream effects of theaters is going to be tremendous, because what you have when you're fighting as a single service is that you will start making requirements, projecting requirements that will be aligned to your service's way of war fighting.
Yes.
So if you ask the Air Force, what do you need? He's going to say, I need 42 squadrons or 45 squadrons. I can't fight without 45 squadrons. If you ask the Navy, he'll say, I need 3 aircraft carriers. The Army, he'll say, I need 5,000 tanks. Or, I need 5 offensive strike corps. But when you integrate all of these into one, you realize that, and this came to me from General Rawat himself. He said, I never knew that a Sukhoi 30 could carry like more than 5 tons of ordnance. That's a lot of combat power. And he says, I discovered that very late in life.
Wow.
And for him to make that honest admission is a problem of our system as well, that we've probably not trained our commanders enough to look at the fighting potential of other services. When you integrate all of this, you can possibly see that you possibly might not need 40 or 50 fighter squadrons. At the end of the day, it is all about ordnance on target, right? It doesn't matter if that ordnance comes from an aircraft, it comes from a warship, or it comes from a ground-based launcher, or a horse cart even. As long as it's ordnance on target, the enemy can't do anything about it. He's overwhelmed. It doesn't matter how it's delivered. That's one aspect of looking at it, of course. So these kind of solutions will now come in when you integrate the assets together, and then the force commander realizes that these are the forces that I have at my command. This is how I can, swing the battle. It's all about war fighting, really, Dev. Yeah. I mean, I hope it never comes down to that, the fact that India fighting endless wars like several other countries in the world. The aim is to create a military like this that will deter conflict, that will force the Pakistanis or maybe the Chinese to think twice before saying that, oh, listen, there's going to be a quick victory. We can move in over here or in that sector. It's going to take India several days to react. Whereas if there's a theater commander over there and he has his orders and he immediately strikes without waiting 2 weeks, 3 weeks or something like that. It's the minute he gets the signal, he goes in and strikes. That's it.
Yeah. And also I'm guessing that is what you just said right now, part of the answer to my long-standing question of why does the Army and the Air Force both have a set of attack helicopters?
Yeah.
Why can't they be just under one single service and then be used accordingly? Right. We'll talk more about this, but after a quick break.
The opposition says it's the job of the government to ensure parliament functions, and you are the parliamentary affairs minister, so you are the Arjun in this Chakravyuh.
This monsoon session of the parliament has been by far the most productive session. In last 11 years of our government under Modi ji, has any minister taken any bribe, taken any benefits, or involved in any scams or scandals? No.
If a chief minister or a minister does not get bail in 30 days,
so he'll go to jail.
उसकी तो दुकान बंद, मतलब his
अरे भाई कोई चीफ मिनिस्टर का पोस्ट आपका बाप दादा ने आपके लिए खरीद के रखा है क्या? 60 years plus, Congress and these people had ruled this country. Why they made India such a corrupt nation? Why they have converted India into such a fragile economic situation? Why was India poor? It is only after 2014 the income has raised to a level where today we can proudly say that we are fastest growing economy. It is the destiny which demands Modi ji to be the leader of this country.
So, Dev, that point you made about attack hepters before the break was spot on, because you're looking at, when a service believes that he cannot get the other services to pitch in or pull in, when there are no theaters coming, then everyone tries to create his own parallel structures. So you will have the army looking for attack helicopters. You'll have the Air Force looking for special forces and commandos. You'll have the Navy looking for creating an army and an Air Force. So, that's how a lot of duplication takes place. And all of this would be obviated when they come together, they plan together, they train together, they put up requirements for resources. They think jointly. I think jointmanship is the key word over here. And when the services sit together, they will come up with joint solutions.
Yeah. A tiny tangent over here, because it may be a question that people within the forces or people sitting in senior positions may think it's a bit stupid. But I still wonder that, do you think of a factor in this debate also is the structure of our military, which is very loyalistic? In fact, you have loyalties dating back to the squadron they were part of in the NDA,
that's right.
in the IMA, in the INA, in the Air Force Academy. You have instance of senior officers still recalling, oh, he's from that squadron of the NDA, so he's my rival.
Yes.
So my question, the progression where I'm going
Yeah.
towards is there a worry also that when you have a theater commander from the army,
Yeah.
when you have a theater commander from the navy, the Air Force person under him or her
Yeah.
would be like, ये तो अपने ultimately तो अपने service side लेगा.
Yeah.
Do you think that worry is also there?
I think, yeah, that is there, and it's a very, very valid worry, Dave, because you're looking at something, the after effects of something like almost nearly 80 years of this single service approach, which some former chiefs have called tribalism. They have a point there. It's almost tribal, this kind of thing. It's extremely good, though. I must tell you that when militaries fight in the field, for instance, when the army fights, they're fighting for the honor of their battalion.
Yes.
That's a very, very powerful motivating cry, because when he goes into battle, he has to perform to an extent that no one in his battalion should ever have to question him or anything else. So he's fighting not just for the country, but for the izzat of his battalion as well. So that's a very powerful motivating factor. But all of this you should shed once you're above the rank of a colonel. Once you start getting on your first star and your second star, as you go up the hierarchy, you should shed some of these inhibitions. Then you should start looking at the bigger picture. And I think that is going to be a very crucial aspect of the theaterization, where you need to create a cadre of officers who think jointly, who train jointly, who plan jointly. And that's going to be the big challenge. And this is not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
It's taken us 25 years to come to where we are today in 2025, right? My hair has gone white reporting this story. It'll probably vanish at the rate at which we're going. I'll lose all my hair by the time we see those theater commands. But, the thing is that it is going to be a big challenge for planning, training jointly. For precisely the reasons you've mentioned, that from the beginning you've been regimented in a certain way to think of your squadron, your unit, your battalion, your regiment. It's very intense in the army, and of course in the Air Force as well. It's not as much in the Navy, but these are some of those big practical hurdles. And it's not very unique to India or the Indian Armed Forces. It's been the thing globally. There have been intense battles in the United States also between the various services. I mean, I've met U.S. Air Force officers who are very riled by the fact that U.S. naval aviators are the toast of the world because of two movies, right? Officer and a Gentleman and Top Gun. And they haven't recovered from that. And within the U.S. Navy as well, you have the Marine Corps, right? Which is part of the United States Navy, which fights jointly with the Navy, but is a separate service. And there's a lot of rivalry there as well. So these kind of things, it's all human nature. But finally, it is for the person at the top to take the ultimate call that do we need it in the national interest? Does it serve India's national interests? And it does. Every study has shown you that this is the need of the hour. And if there is that, I was talking to a former two-star friend, and he said, the sad part of this is that theaterization, all these concepts, they don't win you votes. They are not election issues.
Very, very true.
Why would the politician stick his neck out and call for a theater or announce theaterization if it doesn't win him votes? I said, but then you have to spin it in such a way that it translates into national security objectives. It meets national security aims. The fact that you've created a far more efficient national Indian military force than what previously existed is something that should be made, a key priority for our politicians. And they should understand that, look, this is not something that, that like they say, war is too serious to be left to the generals.
Yes.
Certainly not. And it's issues like this that we should debate more in India, given how important the armed forces are for us and the kind of threats that we face along the northern and the western borders. This needs to become a political discussion point, and it should translate into some kind of political achievements for the government, whoever implements this. And there are plenty of committees. It has bipartisan support across governments, if you look at it, it's only the nature of the appointments that may vary. The UPA had one set of thought process which said that they wanted a permanent chairman chief of staff. They didn't want a chief of defense staff. The NDA says that, look, we need a CDS. But I think on the issue of theatre commands, I think both governments would agree, and there is bipartisan political support for this. So it needs to become a part of our political debates. The opposition also needs to have a say in on this. And finally, we need to get the military that we so badly need.
Yeah. So a couple of final points. One is that if you look at it, like you said, you've reported on this for a long time. So if you look at it, do you think there's actually any more space for debate left? Because, you're talking about committees. I mean, I would call it the dance of the committees. So after the Kargil war, you had a Kargil review committee.
Yeah.
The report of this review committee was reviewed by a group of ministers in 2001. And then they give out a report, which was then you had the Naresh Chandra committee in 2011 to see if this particular group of ministers' report was implemented, and if not, then what could be done to implement it better.
Committee of committees.
Yes. And in 2016, you had the Shekatkar committee.
Yes.
Not exactly in this line of committees, but it was also around this topic of jointness and some other minor things. So you've had all these committees.
Right.
They must have had their debates. So do you think there is any space left for a debate, or do you think the debate is just happening because that call is not being taken? For example, are we now still debating whether we need a CDS versus a COSC? We are not, because that call was taken.
Yeah.
India will have a CDS. Apparently, I think it was your reporting. Even the services were taken by surprise that the PM went out in the speech. They knew it was coming, but they weren't expecting him to make that announcement from the independence from the Red Fort.
It was only going to be a permanent chairman chiefs of staff committee, which is what everyone had anticipated, including us. And I think we were taken by complete surprise in 2019 when he announced the chief of defense staff, and when the appointment was made and General Rawat took over. I remember looking at him and his uniform, and he said, "What are you looking at?" So I said, "I never believed that I would ever see a chief of defense staff in my lifetime." So it took everyone by surprise, and that was the heartening thing for me, because here you had the entire system saying, yes, we need the chief of defense staff. So many committees have recommended it, but let's go for a permanent chairman of the chief of staff, which is one rung lower. So consensus. Let's go for the consensus. Okay, let's not take any harsh decisions. A few people might feel hurt and stuff like that. So I think the government of the day in 2019, Prime Minister Modi made that call. They announced the CDS, but we've stopped short of announcing the second phase of reforms, the most crucial aspect, which is going to be creating the theatre commands. And that is entirely the present chief, General Anil Chauhan's responsibility. And he's maneuvered it. I mean, he's temperamentally very different from General Rawat. General Rawat was very aggressive, and he was a bit like more bullish on a lot of issues. And in all my interactions with him, he used to tell me, "Look, I'm only implementing what every single committee has recommended. I have a cupboard full of committee reports. I'm just pulling out committee reports, looking and said, they've already recommended this, let's do it." He says, "I'm a doer." General Chauhan is a nice person. He believes in consensus. He has a different work style. I mean, equally effective, but a very different work style. He believes in taking people on board, and we'll have to see now. He's got literally this year and next year to implement the theatres, and that's going to be a very, very key reform, and he's in charge. He's the man of the moment now. So it's actually two people now. It's the Prime Minister, it's the Defence Minister Rajnath Singh, and of course it's the Chief of Defence Staff, General Chauhan.
Yeah. Right. Last point then, and going back to the Air Chief's comments from that two-day conference, is one argument that he made that to a layperson like me felt pretty logical. He said, look at Opsindur. Everything was hunky-dory. Everything was rosy. You pummeled Pakistan. So great. So why do you need theatreization? When we have this close coordination, and that is what he's pitching for. He's pitching for a Delhi level, national level, close coordination center that would have all these three services coming in. So seems like a valid counter, Sandeep.
What if Sindoor had ended differently?
Okay.
That's my counter to that. I mean, how do we know? It was entirely unpredictable. What happened on the 9th, for instance. I'm sure the fact that you had a political leadership that was mature enough to work out an escalation ladder that was not deterred by Pakistan's drone attacks on Indian civilians and cities, that very calmly worked out an escalation ladder and then slowly started climbing up that escalation ladder to a point when they authorized airstrikes against Chaklala and Sargoda. Now, these are two targets again. I never thought I would see them being struck in my lifetime. I've spoken to a lot of my friends in the Air Force and across the services. They said, look, we had been rehearsing these scenarios for decades. We never ever thought the time would come when someone would authorize a strike on these targets. But it did happen. What if Op Sindoor had gone differently? Would the Air Force then change its appreciation? Would you want for a wake-up call, a very, very rude shock like 1962, when I would argue the most significant Indian defense reforms took place? That was in the heat of a defeat, a very bad, embarrassing border defeat in the war with China, which then spurred off a whole set of reforms. And we saw how the Indian services performed just 9 years later against Pakistan. The fact is that Op Sindoor worked out well, despite all the narratives and the spins that are being given to it by Pakistan, and then, of course, our new best friend China. What if it had worked out differently? Would you then only reform if you were, shocked? Kargil also. I mean, nothing to cover ourselves with glory. I mean, we missed the intrusions for whatever reasons. We missed the Northern Light Infantry sneaking across the line of control, occupying our posts. We didn't appreciate the size and scale of the intrusions. And then finally, when they were detected, it was, the three services saying, oh, should we employ air power? And then finally the political thing. It was very slow. My sense is that wars of the 21st century, we've seen that 88 hours. Op Sindoor unfolded in 88 hours. Do we have the luxury today of having three separate, five disparate commands or six commands, and then, asking everyone to build up a consensus, going to a committee and saying this is what we need to do and all that? Or do you want a force commander who's there, who's got all the assets under him, and he's the single point of authorizing the kinetic strikes or launching the kinetic strikes? You're actually looking at a leaner, meaner military that will strike in hours and not in days. So this is the scenario that you're looking at in this very changed Op Sindoor conflict scenario, where again 88 hours, that's how long the entire conflict lasted.
Yeah, right. I think we'll end it there. And I think like you were talking about, well, like you said before we began recording, that ultimately this is going to be a political decision, just like the appointment of the CDS was. To take my point forward, it was a raging debate until the appointment was made.
Yeah.
After that, everybody has sort of fallen in line, has accepted that CDS is the new normal, and everyone's very happy about it as well.
Yeah.
So you don't see any complaints anymore. So perhaps it's about ironing out those final wrinkles and just taking that plunge that may or may not happen very soon. So we'll keep tracking and we'll discuss when we know more on this topic. Thanks, Sandeep. Great chat as always.
As always, Dev.
And thanks to all our listeners and viewers. That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and do not cross any boundaries with your passport. Bye-bye.